Okay, and we also have with us today what many consider as a messenger of hope, and I would also very surely think of as a catalyst for action. His name is Minister Louis Farrakhan, a highly controversial figure, misunderstood by many, and that is why we're so delighted to have him on our program today, so that he can share with many of you what his true convictions and commitments are to the struggle of an oppressed people wherever they are. So we understand that we have Minister Louis Farrakhan on the line with us now, so we'll go right to him. Minister Farrakhan?
How are you?
Oh, I'm just fantastic. How are you?
I'm fine and very, very happy and grateful to Almighty God for blessing me with this privilege of being on your show.
Right. I hear your voice is cracking just a bit. I understand, Minister Farrakhan, that you are on a national tour of the country. What are you touring? What is the tour all about?
Well, as you know, our teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was a man passionately concerned for the total uplift of black people and oppressed people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And his thrust took on not only mental uplift or spiritual uplift, but it also dealt with educational uplift and economic uplift.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are touring the country now, introducing a new line of products called Clean and Fresh products that will offer jobs to our jobless, underemployed, and those who just wish to increase their earnings. We are on this tour to create from 5,000 to 100,000 jobs.
How extensive, Minister Farrakhan, is the tour? Where have you been so far, and where are you headed now?
Miami, St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago. We have been in Houston, Dallas. We are on our way to Boston, Massachusetts, and then Los Angeles. And then, of course, New York and Philadelphia, San Diego.
I see. That sounds like a fantastic tour. So far, what has been the response to the tour? And I know now Power, I'm aware of Power is the organization that you are expounding on as you tour the country. Tell me first, Minister Farrakhan, what has the response been to this tour, and what does Power stand for?
Well, Power is an acronym
Mm-hmm.
that means people organized and working for economic rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
We don't necessarily need to use the acronym because what a people oppressed need is power.
Mm-hmm.
Education is power, politics is power, and of course economics is power. And the greatest power of all is the power of the knowledge of self and the knowledge of God.
True.
And when we put all of this power together, meaning this knowledge together, then we can improve the condition of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the thrust of our message as we tour the country.
Mm-hmm. Minister Farrakhan, what you just described is generally what you hear in the traditional Christian philosophy. And if that being the case, and you also believe that, where is this misunderstanding coming from that so many people have of you and your message?
Well, oftentimes misunderstanding comes due to misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm.
If we were alive 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire,
mm-hmm.
it would be very difficult to get a proper understanding of what Jesus was about,
mm-hmm.
because of the misrepresentation of him due to the fear
mm-hmm.
of those in authority.
Mm-hmm.
When they saw a man coming representing a new kingdom
mm-hmm.
and a new political reality that had not yet come to birth.
Mm-hmm.
A man who opened the eyes of the blind and made the deaf hear and the dumb speak and the lame to walk. This frightened those religious leaders who felt that they had a message, but it wasn't producing the same powerful effect as the message of Jesus. So they propagandized against Jesus, and they called him everything but what he actually was.
Mm-hmm.
He was called anti-Roman,
mm-hmm.
the gods of Rome and anti the religion of Rome and anti the licentious feasts of Rome. And of course, if you read the text of the New Testament very carefully, if you were to read it, you might even refer to Jesus as anti-Semitic, even though they say he himself was a Jew.
I see. Then do you feel that you fall in that category of being feared or misunderstood because you've been misrepresented? And if you do feel that you're misrepresented, who is doing the misrepresenting and why?
Historically, Joyce, every time a black person arose among us to amend the terrible condition that has been handed down to us as a result of slavery, that person was misrepresented and ultimately destroyed. We need only look to the history of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, and Paul Robeson, Adam Clayton Powell. All of these black men who worked for the liberation of our people were maligned and then destroyed. It is because of a great fear on the part of those who have oppressed us that we as oppressed people might one day awaken, unite, organize, and of course overturn the oppressive conditions under which we suffer. And Brother Farrakhan, unfortunately and fortunately, falls into that category. And those who misrepresent me are those who stand to gain from the horrible condition that black people suffer under. The number one enemy, and I'm sorry to say this, has always been the government of the United States. It was the government of the United States that lied on Marcus Garvey, had a mock trial of him, and sent him to prison, then deported him and broke up his movement. It was the United States government, through the counterintelligence program of J. Edgar Hoover, that hatched a plan to destroy and malign practically every nationalist or black-thinking, race-conscious leader in the 60s. And they did do that. And it was the government of the United States that cannot escape culpability in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. or of complicity in the assassination of Malcolm X.
I see. Do you feel, Minister Farrakhan, that some people think that your message is only for black people? Is that the way you want to be thought of?
You know, if I may put it in a Christian context, when Jesus first appeared among the people, he told his disciples, "Go ye not in the way of the Samaritans or into the way of the Gentiles, but go ye to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And then at a certain point he said, "Go ye into all the world and take this gospel to every nation, kindred, and tongue." The message of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad first is a message to the black man, because the black people all over the earth are the most oppressed and depressed and suppressed. But after that message performs its duty to the masses of black people, it must be a message for all of humanity.
Right. Now, you mentioned the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I know you have a very close relationship with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and perhaps saw him as a father figure. Could you briefly, Minister Farrakhan, tell us how you met him? How did you get into this world of Islam and live life so passionately as you do, and have this great commitment to and for black people?
Well, first, I had a wonderful mother who is from the Caribbean, who taught me of blackness early in my life. In fact, the first thing that I began to read, believe it or not, was the Crisis magazine of the NAACP. I read the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois, and of course my mother always fed us with the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the general black newspapers, which constantly focused on the suffering of our people, particularly in the South. I grew up an Episcopalian. I sang in the choir. I carried the cross. I loved the church, and I do love the church even today. However, I was looking for someone who would deliver our people from the condition that we were in. As a young boy, I remember saying to my mother that if God sent Moses to deliver the children of Israel, why won't God send someone to deliver us? I did not find that deliverance message in the church. I did not find that passionate concern to reform the condition of black people in the church. I found a beautiful spirit, a beautiful people in love with Jesus, in love with Christ, but not passionate to go out in the highways and byways and change the condition or the reality under which black folk live. And so as a young boy, I met Malcolm X in 1952, and then later I went to the mosque here in Chicago and heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and I said, this is the man I've been looking for all my life. And of course I changed my faith from Christianity to Islam. But as I mature in Islam, I find that the same deep message that is found in Islam is really the message of all of the prophets, and it certainly is the message of Christ. And so I now go back to the church with the profound understanding that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has given me of the Bible and of the Holy Quran to share this message with our brothers and sisters in the church, because the church is the last hope of our people in terms of awakening them. So if the pastors could come alive to the real meaning of the gospel and preach it unashamed and unafraid, our people would wake up overnight.
Yeah, that's a mouthful you said there, Minister Farrakhan. We're going to take a brief informational break, and we're going to come back and get on further into this, because I've got many, many questions that I want to ask you, and I think there are many people out there who would like to have some clarification. So if you just hold tight, Minister Farrakhan, we'll be right back. We're going to take a brief informational break, okay?
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, we're back again, and you're listening to the daytime version of Conversation for Inspiration. My very special guest today is Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is National Representative for the Nation of Islam. And we have Minister Farrakhan on the line right now, and we're going to go back to him. Minister Farrakhan, you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about you had to leave the church and you converted to Islam because you could not find the passionate desire in the church to come out of this sense of slavery that black people are in. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it is that here we are in 1987, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in 67, that's 20 years ago, and we're pretty much in the same state today that we were in 1967. What do you think the church should do about it? If you were a minister of God, and you are, but I'm talking about in the traditional church that you had to come out of, what would you be saying to your congregation?
I think the reason I said that the church represents the last hope, it is because of the destruction of all black organizations. The government has not as yet interfered with the black church. The black pastor or preacher is one of the most free and independent black people that there are, because he doesn't have to work for anybody. If he works for his congregation and they support him, then that man has a tremendous responsibility. According to the scriptures, it warns us, woe unto the shepherd who feeds himself and not the flock. Should not the shepherd feed the flock? Then if Jesus said to his disciples that a great day of separation would take place, and that day of separation would be because men and nations did not do several things. One, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, minister to the sick and imprisoned. And Jesus said, inasmuch as you have not done this unto the least of these my brethren, you have not done it also unto me. I think the church needs to be transformed into a revolutionary, I don't want to use that word if it means or connotes violence.
Right.
But I'm speaking of a revolutionary kind of religious force.
Fervor, yes.
That will transform the black community. And I know that if each preacher took his church, looked at those who were unemployed, and then said it is his duty to bring employment to those. If he began to think in terms of how to pool the resources of his congregation to set up businesses for his congregation, and if the Baptists as a group, and the Methodists as a group, and the Episcopalians as a group met, conferred, and pooled their resources, we could end the economic problem that black people suffer. And the beauty of it would be that it would come through the church. Then young people who are leaving the church feeling that it is not relevant would find the church as a relevant place, not just for the singing of hymns and shouting and glorifying God with hymns of praise, but our whole lifestyle would be a hymn of praise to God. And that's what I would like to see and done with the church. And if I live by the grace of God and have this communion with the pastors that we are developing, we hope to produce this kind of revolutionary ministry for the sake of our people.
You're talking about be ye transformed by the newness of your mind, renewing of your mind is what you're talking about. We don't want people to misconstrue when you said a revolution, misconstrue that you are referring to violent revolution.
Revolution in this sense would mean complete change. And what has happened to the church, in my judgment, it is just as Paul has said, it has conformed to the world. And what the church needs is a renewing of the mind. And if the mind is made new, then the things that come from us will be new. Our whole lifestyle will be new. And that is the only way I see us as a people surviving and really turning America around.
Well, do you think that because this has not happened, and you're just beginning to talk about developing this relationship with the ministers, why? My question is, Minister Farrakhan, why has this not happened? Can't we see the state that we're in as a people? Why has this not happened, this coming together? What is it that causes this race of people who are so strong and powerful and so creative and spiritual to be the lowest on the totem pole? And we have the Koreans and all other cultures come to this country, set up businesses right in our neighborhoods. Why does this exist that we seem to be happy with our plight? Why is this?
Well, Sister Joyce, we are now celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. And in 1787, when this document was written up, the President, George Washington, of course, was a slaveholder. And when they said we the people, they really were not concerned with us. When they sat down in Philadelphia, they argued with some of the states of the South because the South wanted every slave represented as a whole person, which would increase their representation in the House of Representatives. The North did not want us to be considered at all since we were slaves, and they were not considering us as a part of their political development, but chattel, a part of their economic development. So they compromised, and it was written into the Constitution that we were 3/5 of a human being. And as a result of that compromise, the United States Senate was formed. After the Civil War, they amended the Constitution because it was flawed, and we were now set free, and I put that free in quotes. They could amend the piece of paper, Sister Joyce, but they never did anything to amend the condition that 300 years of servitude, slavery, fostered. And so to this very moment, we suffer the after effects of a slave condition. And even though we are educated, and even though we go to church, we yet find this crab in the barrel, hate one another, envy and jealousy that keeps us fighting each other rather than moving ahead.
Well, don't we know that?
We know this, but we lack the specific knowledge that would cleanse us of this life of slavery. And that knowledge, Sister Joyce, is, I believe, what Jesus was referring to when he said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. If we are in 1987 and we're still singing, we shall overcome, and we know Jesus, and we know the scripture, then there's something that is missing. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us that what is missing is a knowledge of self that would put in us pride of self, love for self, and thereby foster a unity of self which would give us the power to overcome the obstacles that are in our path. This is what the Cubans have, the Koreans have, the Vietnamese, the Arabs, the Jews, the Haitians that have come to this country. Even though the environment is racist and inherently hostile to new or strange people, these people with their cultural unity have overcome it. However, we have been here 432 years and we are at the bottom of the totem pole. One last point that I want to mention. When the Reverend Jesse Jackson ran for the presidency, the nomination for the presidency of the Democratic Party in 1984, and he asked me to stand by his side. This was the first time that two persons of divergent philosophical, ideological, and even religious views were able to stand on the same platform as brothers. Martin Luther King and Malcolm did not do that. Martin Luther King and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad didn't do it. Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois didn't do it. But Reverend Jackson and I did it. And the fact that a Muslim and a Christian stood together, Joyce, this electrified black people everywhere they saw us together.
That's true.
Well, whenever that kind of unity is budding and love and tolerance and understanding among us, there are those who feel so fearful of our unity that they work overtime to destroy it. And they did not rest until they separated the Reverend Jackson and I from one another by falsely saying in the press, alleging things that I never said, and then forcing the Reverend Jackson, instead of having to deal with his own program, having to answer for me and then ultimately to repudiate me. And of course, this angered some of our people, but it made joyous those enemies of black unity who do not want to see Muslims and Christians, or for that matter, the denominational disunity of Christians, come together as one family of Christ.
Right, I'm going to ask you whether or not you are going to be participating in the campaign of Jesse Jackson as he takes his second try for the presidency of the United States. But I want you to hold on, Minister Farrakhan. We're going to take a brief informational break. And we'll be right back, okay?
All right.
All righty. Okay, we're going to go back now to our conversation with Minister Louis Farrakhan, okay? Minister Farrakhan.
Yes.
Okay, good to have you here again. Now, are you going to be participating in the campaign of the Reverend Jesse Jackson this time?
No, I am not. Even though I would like very much to be of service, however, Reverend Jackson has to be seen as a president of all of the people. And if I am perceived by the majority community as being anti-white and anti-Semitic...
Is that true? Is that true that you are anti-white, anti-Semitic?
Of course not. I'll answer that in just a moment. But I would rather feel that if that is the way I am perceived, then I am a heavy piece of baggage that Reverend Jackson can ill afford to have with him. So if you can't help your brother, you should not be a hindrance to him. And so I would step back from this campaign and allow my brother to do the very best that he can. However, I would say to all of those who are listening, Reverend Jackson, of course, is the front runner now, and there are 26% of the Democratic Party that wish Reverend Jackson well, and the nearest one to him is Governor Dukakis of Massachusetts with 11%. Now, this puts Reverend Jackson in a good position, a strong position, but in a very dangerous position, because we are still in a very racist society that does not wish to see a black man do anything other than sing and dance and play music or run a football or box. So when you have a very serious person who can do real good for the country, there are some whites who would want to see him do that good, whether he is white or black, but then there are others who would just hate the fact of a black man even being close to being a president. And so he needs our prayers, and he needs a support from his own community in order that we can stop whatever might be planned against him from happening.
Now, Minister Farrakhan, do you consider yourself a preacher of hate? So many people tend to think that, maybe according again to this misrepresentation, do you preach hate?
People. Before there was a Noah, we were. Before there was an Adam, we were. There were people that are called pre-Adamites. And the pre-Adamites, according to the scholars of religion, are the aboriginal people of the earth. And those people are black people like you and me. So when you teach black people the truth of themselves, to make them respect themselves as a wonderful creation of God, and you show them the injustice of this society against them, those that have done and perpetrated the injustice feel stung by the truth, so they charge you with teaching hate while you're teaching the truth, of course, that makes our people intolerant of any form of injustice.
And there also are black people who also feel that you preach hate. What would you say to them?
Those black people who feel that are only echoing the sentiments of white folk, but they don't really know me. And they've never really heard me. 90% of the black people that hear me, they go away totally changed after hearing me. They say, well, that man is not what I read about. That man is not what I heard. And really what it is the great fear on the part of white people, that there is a black voice in America that tens of thousands of black people are listening to, and it is a voice that they don't control. And when they don't control you, then they cannot direct you or misdirect you, then they're very afraid. So what they will do is put a blanket over you or a shroud over you or a veil over you, and that veil will say to black people, don't listen to him, he's anti-Semitic. I do criticize Jewish behavior, but I criticize our own behavior. That doesn't make me anti-black. I criticize the government's misbehavior, but that doesn't make me anti-American. Some of the greatest patriots are those who will correct injustice, for it is only through the correction of injustice that the longevity of a nation is preserved.
Okay, Minister Farrakhan, back some years ago, you were accused in terms of anti-Semitic remarks when you made the remark regarding Hitler being a great leader. Strange enough, when I heard you make that comment, I knew exactly what you meant, and I knew the context in which you meant it. I felt that I knew it, but that was misconstrued, and I want to give you an opportunity now to share with our listeners what you meant by being a great leader.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to put all of that in context. You know, we invited the Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1984 to be a principal speaker on the day before our national convention. Nearly 10,000 people showed up at the Richard L. Jones Armory to hear the Reverend Jackson. At that time, I introduced Reverend Jackson and I made a passionate plea to the Jewish community who were at that time lambasting Reverend Jackson with ads in the New York Times and other respected journals saying Jews against Jesse and ruin Jesse ruin. And you know, the picture of Jesse hugging Arafat was put out there, and I felt that the Jews at that point were insensitive to the fact that Jesse Jackson had become the champion of black America. And 90% of our people were with Reverend Jackson. And I felt that they were doing irreparable damage to black-Jewish relationships by the way they were handling the Reverend Jackson. So in my appeal to them, I appealed to them to dialogue, to sit down and let us reason this thing, because I felt that they were creating an atmosphere into which Reverend Jackson could be assassinated. And I warned them that we are tired of feeding our leaders to white America like you feed raw meat to wild beasts. And that if they harmed Reverend Jackson, that he would be the last black man that would be done to, you know? So the next day, on a radio broadcast out of New York, I heard Nathan Perlmutter, the head of the B'nai B'rith, referring to me as a new black Hitler. And in defense of myself on my own radio broadcast, I said, well, now you compare me to Hitler. I said Hitler was a great man for his people. He rebuilt Germany from the ashes of her defeat after World War I. I said, but I said, in that sense, you can compare me with Hitler because we are trying to rebuild black people from the ashes of slavery. I said, but don't compare me with your wicked killers. I said, Hitler was a great man, but he was wickedly great. Last night, when they showed the television story, The Blessings of Liberty, they talked about the First World War, 1914, and they called it the Great War. And then the Depression of 1929, they called it the Great Depression. The Great War wasn't a good war. The Great Depression wasn't a good depression. I used the word great in the dictionary meaning of it, something having far-reaching consequences and magnitude. Hitler and his reign had far-reaching consequences, and he has affected the whole world. And so I said he was a great man, but he was wickedly great. Now, these people know the language. They taught it to me. They knew exactly what I meant. But in their rush to destroy Reverend Jackson, you see, those Jewish persons in control of the media sent the word out. And then the next day after I said Hitler was wickedly great, there were headlines in the Sun-Times and in other papers across the country. Now, I don't make headlines. It's for a black person to get in the headline, he would either have to jump off a bridge, kill 100 white folk, rape his own mother or something, then maybe he would get a mention. But for me to be on the front page headlines in New York, in Chicago, and other places because I said Hitler was wickedly great, then they had another motive. And the motive was to destroy Reverend Jackson. So the headline in Chicago said, Jackson pal praises Hitler. You see? So they were really aiming at Reverend Jackson, but using me as a vehicle to hurt Reverend Jackson. And they felt that by bombarding me in the media week after week after week, that I would be afraid to come out of the house and show my face. But then I fought back. And in fighting back, I have a knowledge of their history that they might not want the world to know. But I am a man that is unafraid because I put my trust completely in God.
Yes.
And I fear no one but God.
Yes.
And so if they want to fight me in that way, I will fight you in that way, and I will win because I have the truth with me. So now they didn't succeed in destroying me. They succeeded in making me a very popular black man among our people, if for no other reason than I would not back down from their attacks on me. And then now they've turned the whole thing around as though I attacked them when it was they who were doing the attacking of Reverend Jackson and myself.
Right. I'm glad you had this opportunity on the program today to bring clarity to those headlines. We're down to Minister Farrakhan to our last 3 or 4 minutes here. And I wanted to just briefly have you to share that the Final Call building is located in Chicago at 79th and
79th and Union.
17.
It's 734
Right.
West 79th Street, and our meetings there are every Wednesday at 8, Friday at 7:30, and Sunday at 1 p.m.
Right.
in the afternoon.
And you're on WBEE, I
We're
believe
on
it
radio
is,
station WBEE
every Sunday.
every Sunday. And for those in the listening audience who don't have a job, or who feel that they're underemployed, or would like to add more earnings to their own paycheck, if you would call the Power Office at 943-3851. That's 943-3851. If you're interested in a job, if you'd like to sell the clean and fresh products, which are very good products, which will give you a handsome income, please call that number. And if you don't have a job and you don't have training on how to sell, you call that number anyway. Training can be arranged for you. That number is 943-3851.
943-3851. Minister Farrakhan, in our last few minutes, or a last minute here, I'd like to ask you the question that I think is very stimulating and provocative. If Jesus Christ, Minister Farrakhan, were here today and you had an opportunity to talk with him, of course I know you talked to him in the spirit, but I'm talking about in the flesh as he was 2,000 years ago, what would be your question to him? What would you want to discuss with him?
You know, first, if Jesus were here, many who say they believe in him would reject him, because the scripture describes him to us not as blonde hair or blue-eyed, but as a man having hair like lamb's wool and feet like burnished brass. And if I had a chance to meet with him, I would only ask him, could I be one of your followers? And could I stand with you to correct the injustice of this earth, that the kingdom of heaven may be established on this earth? Could I work with him to go out after the despised and the rejected, the unloved and the unwanted, and let them know that the kingdom is at hand right now, that the governments of this world, including the government of the United States, is not a Christ-filled government. His spirit is not in this government. It is not in Russia. It is not in China. But these governments and these powers will be swept away, and the power of Christ will be established on this earth. I would just want to be a part of that kingdom, even if I couldn't be fully accepted, if I could just
Touch the
herald that kingdom to those who would be willing to go in, and hopefully he would permit me in to be with him.
And you're talking, Minister Farrakhan, in our final 10 seconds, you're talking about oppressed people all over the world. You're not particularly talking about blacks, only blacks, but you're talking about oppressed people all over the world. Is that right?
I'm talking about any human being who loves righteousness and justice and peace, it is those human beings who not only love it but will commit their lives to the principles that bring about the love of one for another, the love of one human for another, and the establishment of peace. It is they that will be with him, in my judgment, in the kingdom of God.
Minister Farrakhan, this has been a most rewarding, stimulating, satisfying conversation with you, and I thank God for you and praise God, and we'll be praying for you in all your endeavors. And I hope when you find some free time, would you please come back as a guest again on Conversation for Inspiration?
Anytime, Sister Joyce, that I'm in the city and you have the time and would desire me to be a part of your show, I would be always happy to come. And if I could just say this in closing, we thank God for you and for this radio station and for this kind of proper use of the airwaves, not to inflict upon the minds of the listeners the filth that is pouring out from the radio stations across this land, but to inspire, motivate, stimulate people toward God. That's the proper use of the airwaves. So we thank God for you, and we praise God for you and for this broadcast and for this radio station.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
You're so welcome, Minister Farrakhan, and I thank you again for adding such delight and clarity to our program this afternoon. And we will be in touch with you and to bring you back on again as a guest on Conversation for Inspiration.
Thank you.
Okay.